This segment of WGCU's Local Untold Stories is underwritten by Collier County Government, County Commission, the District School Board of Collier County, City of Naples, City Council, the Barron Collier Jr. Foundation, and the Collier County Museum.
On the southwestern tip of Florida lies a region called the 10,000 Islands. It is here that the Everglades and Big Cypress Swamp meet the mangrove fringes of the Gulf Coast. Nestled in the heart of this wilderness are the small communities of Chokoloskee Island and Everglades City. In spite of their remote location, these two early Collier County settlements have played an important role in South Florida history. Thousands of years ago, Calusa Indians roamed the region, living on man-made mounds of shell several feet high. After the Calusa's demise, southwest Florida was more or less unpopulated until Seminole Indians arrived in the 19th century. Soon, white settlers followed.
It really isn't until after the Civil War in the 1870s and 1880s that the first settlers start trickling down into southwest Florida from Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Mississippi.
These first white pioneers who arrived in the Chokoloskee Bay Country settled on islands and near rivers atop the shell mounds left behind by the Calusa.
The first settler of record in Everglades area is William Smith Allen, who is a farmer from Connecticut who waited out the Civil War in Key West and then headed north up the coast.
Allen settled on Potato Creek in the vicinity of modern-day Everglades City. Potato Creek was later renamed Allen's River after the early settler, and today is known as the Barron River. A few miles away from Allen's homestead, John Weeks is thought to have been the first white pioneer to settle on Chokoloskee Island.
Pioneer life in southwest Florida was as brutal and miserable as it gets, and also as bountiful as it gets. It really is a paradise, and it certainly appeared to them to be a paradise. But you had to understand that life was very difficult. They fished, they farmed, they trapped, they hunted.
Travel to and from the Chokoloskee Bay area was by sailboat. Travel times depended on the wind and tides. Most early settlers arrived from the county seat in Key West. They also sold their produce there. Once the railroad reached Punta Gorda and later Fort Myers, farmers shipped their crops north from there. In 1887, the region became part of newly created Lee County, but it remained a remote outpost on Florida's frontier, with its new county seat of Fort Myers as difficult to reach by boat as Key West. It wouldn't be until decades later that roads were built, making overland travel possible.
Very few people have penetrated the interior of southwest Florida. The Seminoles certainly had penetrated and had found waterways and routes into the interior, but the settlers didn't know about these yet.
But the remote location didn't deter the hardiest of pioneers. In 1892, the Reverend George W. Gatewood brought his 16-year-old wife Minnie to the Methodist mission he had established in the 10,000 Islands. Throughout their 2-year stay there, Minnie kept a diary.
June 23rd, 1892. The sandflies and the mosquitoes were so bad we could not rest, not even under the mosquito bar. They were so bad we could not sleep, and to smoke didn't hurt them at all.
The days before air conditioning, before mosquito control, you've got crop failures and drought, the occasional freeze that would destroy your cash crops as well. Panthers, bobcats, bears who would carry off livestock.
We call this God's country because he could not give it to anybody. C.G. McKinney.
C.G. McKinney arrived on Chokoloskee Island in 1886. In 1891, he established the first post office on Florida's Gulf Coast, south of Fort Myers.
He actually named his post office Comfort Florida, and then changed it to Chokoloskee.
Not far away, at the settlement of Everglade, George Washington Storter purchased William Smith Allen's property. In 1892, he also opened a trading post, and 3 years later, Everglades' first post office. The area's third trading post was established when C.S. Ted Smallwood moved to the area. He took over as postmaster on Chokoloskee Island from C.G. McKinney. Over time, these folks became friendly with the Seminole Indians, who lived in villages scattered across the nearby Everglades and Big Cypress Swamp.
July 6th, 1892. While I was cooking dinner, I happened to look out the door and saw 2 Indians passing, and their names were Water Turkey and Tommy Osceola. Minnie Gatewood.
The Seminole population was very small in those days and widely scattered, and they preferred to live by themselves. They were understandably mistrustful of white people and didn't have a lot of dealings with them. So it was really the trading post that brought these two sides back together again.
Using their traditional dugout canoes, the Seminoles traveled to the trading posts in Everglade and on Chokoloskee Island well into the 20th century.
They go there a lot. Even in canoe here used to go. And they lives in the hammock back there. Then so they swing over out in the water and come over to the Thousand Island, back over to Chokoloskee, and then they get the groceries and supply, and they go right back in there, back over to hammocks area.
As is the case in many remote areas, the Chokoloskee Bay country attracted its cast of shady characters and fugitives from justice. One was Edgar Watson. Before turning up on Florida's frontier, he had been a prime suspect in the killing of the famous outlaw Belle Starr.
He was a planter at Chatham Bend, and unfortunately a lot of his workers disappeared on payday and never showed up again. And so his neighbors were suspicious of him, and eventually it had enough. And outside Smallwood's store, he was gunned down in 1910 by a gathering of his neighbors.
With the nearest sheriff miles away, it wasn't uncommon for early pioneers to take the law in their own hands, settling disputes themselves.
That whole cracker culture is based on that self-reliance, family, kinship with your immediate and extended families.
In the 1920s, this region of Florida began to emerge from its isolation and obscurity. Streetcar advertising magnate Barron Gift Collier was on his way. Since first coming to Florida in 1911, the Memphis-born millionaire had purchased thousands of acres of land in southern Lee County, including George W. Storter's property in Everglade. In 1923, Collier convinced the state legislature to separate his land holdings from Lee County, creating a county bearing his name. In return, he promised to finish the final stretch of an ambitious road-building project that had come to a screeching halt because of a lack of funding. The Tamiami Trail, as it was called, was to connect Tampa with Miami. The final and most difficult stretch of road across Collier's land in the Everglades had yet to be built. Barron Collier went to work immediately. He decided to locate his headquarters at Everglade. He renamed the community Everglades and made it his county seat.
It would be hard to overstate the impact that Barron Collier had on the whole region, particularly Everglade. He transformed what was then a trading post on the frontier into a relatively modern town, even by today's standards. Principally to build the Tamiami Trail and support that effort, but then also to, in his words, transform the region into a place where people would come and live and really enjoy life.
Constructing the trail was a tremendous task, requiring heavy machinery and dredges. It also took a lot of manpower. Rowan "Doc" Johnson came from Georgia to work on the trail. He remembered that many of his co-workers couldn't take the heat and the mosquitoes.
Mr. Collier said he had 3 crews, 1 crew on the job, 1 crew on a boat leaving, and another crew coming in.
Despite the harsh working conditions, not a single life was lost during the trail's construction. While crews worked on his road, Barron Collier also put a lot of resources into building his model company town. Over time, he built a bank, a hospital, hotels, a laundry, shops, and housing for his employees. And he provided public transportation that included his signature mode of advertising.
One of the first improvements that Collier made to Everglades was the arrival of a streetcar, which he shipped in, again by sea, complete with rails and advertising cards.
Though the existence of the streetcar was short-lived, it gained the distinction of being the first of its kind south of Tampa on Florida's west coast. The new town of Everglades attracted more visitors to the 10,000 islands than ever before. Sport fishermen had ventured into the area as early as the late 1800s, often staying at the Storter family homestead. Barron Collier bought the home, enlarged it, and renamed it the Rod and Gun Club. Under the direction of its German manager, Snooky Senghas, the club became famous for its hospitality and cuisine, welcoming many dignitaries and celebrities. After 5 years of hard work, the final stretch of the Tamiami Trail was finally completed, connecting the community of Everglades to the outside world by land. The road officially opened on April 26, 1928.
I wandered on the Tamiami Trail, Tamiami Trail.
At the time the trail was opened in 1928, newspapers and reporters, they likened the achievement to the building of the Panama Canal. It was that big a story.
To ensure safety and to provide roadside assistance along his new road, Barron Collier established the Southwest Mounted Police.
Almost immediately after completing the Tamiami Trail, Collier established 6 motorist aid stations, usually a husband and wife team, a deputy who patrolled his stretch of highway on a motorcycle, and the wife who stayed behind and dispensed soft drinks and oil and gas to passing motorists.
Barron Collier had hoped that the opening of the trail would lead to a surge of growth in Collier County, but the economic climate of the time, first the bust of Florida's 1920s land boom, followed by the Great Depression, postponed that anticipated growth for several decades. But things didn't come to a complete halt in his company town.
Dad came to Everglades City in 1928, and he went to work for the Collier Corporation as an electrician. It was very bustling. According to my dad, it was.
In the community's early years, Barron Collier owned almost everything in Everglades. Life in his company town was very structured. A whistle would blow to signal the start of work, lunchtime, and quitting time.
The Collier Corporation printed script money, $1 script, $5, $10, and $20, and I don't suppose they printed anything larger than that because wages were low. They paid their workers in script. The script was only redeemable in Everglades City, at the market, at the barber shop, at the cafe.
We often hear of Everglades being referred to as a company town, and in many ways, I suppose it was, especially by 1920 standards. You shopped at Collier stores, you bought Collier gasoline, you traveled on his bus line and on his trolley car. But a lot of company towns don't provide the extent of services that he did. You know, banks, newspapers, Shakespearean club, libraries. So there was, it was a cultured company town. And in many ways, I think he was striving for a model town.
But before Barron Collier could fulfill all his Florida dreams, he died in 1939.
I think that most people would agree, especially in Everglades City today, that the boom years, the heyday of Everglades was when Barron Collier was there personally directing things. I don't know that magic, was ever quite the same after Barron Collier, was gone.
After Collier's death, his 3 sons carried on the company's activities. Like their father, they worked closely with David Graham Copeland, Collier's former engineer and manager of his Florida ventures. He was one of several people who left notable impressions on the minds and hearts of Chokoloskee's and Everglades residents. Another was the Deaconess Harriet Bedell, who arrived in 1933 to resurrect the defunct Glades Cross mission. With time, the deaconess made friends with the Seminole Indians.
I guess she goes around and people donate to her to take some lot of stuff to the reservation over Big Cypress reservation, but they didn't have no roads then. So they borrow a Model T. Most of the time, they pull her dress up and push in that Model T to go across the mud area. And then that's how hard she works for the Indians.
In 1947, the opening of Everglades National Park drew national attention. As South Florida kept growing, conservationists lobbied to preserve a segment of this tropical wilderness. Extensive drainage projects in the northern Everglades had already begun to cause changes in the ecosystem, threatening the natural balance of Florida's river of grass. Everglades National Park was the first park created not for its beauty, but for its ecological importance.
I was standing on the street with my little Browning camera when President Truman came into town I took photographs to dedicate the Everglades National Park.
While the community of Everglades had undergone a rapid transformation after Barron Collier's arrival, life on nearby Chokoloskee Island remained slow.
The road was not over here at the time, so you had to come by boat. Everybody traveled by boat or they walked around the island. There were no roads on the island. There was one main road on the island.
While there was a grade school on Chokoloskee, students attending high school did so in nearby Everglades.
They had a boat, called a school boat, and we went by boat. And then in my senior year, they had built the causeway across, and I went by bus.
As early as the 1930s, there had been talk of building a causeway from Everglades to the island, but the plan did not materialize until 1955. The arrival of the bridge would bring the end of an era for islanders.
It started changing. The island was shell, and it had big shell mounds all over the island. Well, in a little while, they started pushing the shell mounds down and making roads through there. And it wasn't long before they built the trailer parks.
Changes were underway for Everglades as well. In 1953, the legislature authorized a new town charter, and Everglades became a city. Barron Collier never intended for it to remain a permanent company town, and so in the 1950s, the company began selling its properties to the community.
Right after the Second World War, the pattern of settlement begins to change in Collier County. The population is increasing in Naples, but actually decreasing or holding the same in Everglades City. And new businesses are gravitating towards Naples and not Everglades. As something that even the people here were beginning to really take stock of and realize and come to grips with. By the late 50s, there's a referendum in place to relocate the county government seat.
Before that referendum could be implemented, a storm blew over the Atlantic in 1960 that would change the course of history. Hurricane Donna left a trail of destruction and caused tremendous damage in Everglades and on Chokoloskee Island.
Bulldozers had been in to bulldoze the streets, and there was mud higher than my car on both sides of the streets. It was terrible.
Donna was by no means the first or last hurricane to wreak havoc on the region, but its timing and destruction contributed to the continuing decline in Everglades' regional importance. In November 1960, the Collier Corporation relocated its offices to Naples, and the county government soon followed. In 1962, the Bank of Everglades moved to Immokalee. Some feared this would be the end of the small communities at the edge of the Everglades. The population declined, but the communities held on. In 1965, Everglades was renamed Everglades City. One industry which was independent from Collier's operations and had been going strong since the beginning of the area's short recorded history was commercial fishing. The fishermen sold their catch to local fish houses, which in turn shipped it to northern markets.
These fish houses had run boats that would run up and down the coast of Florida, south of here and north. And they had floating fish houses out there that the commercial fishermen, a lot of them lived on houseboats, and they'd tow these houseboats to the area where they were fishing, and then they'd take their catch into the floating fish house, and they'd ship them out, you know, offload them and sort them and ship them.
The catch included mullet, pompano, trout, and mackerel. In the 1950s, fishermen from North Carolina arrived in the area to work in the shrimping industry until that gave way to stone crabbing.
It started with Ernest Hamilton, who caught the stone crabs for Stone Crab Joe in Miami, and he sold them to the restaurant there as well as local restaurants. And then it just began to take, and people really liked them, so they continued to buy them, and the industry grew bigger.
But the continued degradation of the Everglades ecosystem and its adjoining bays, caused by extensive changes in the region's natural water flow, led managers at Everglades National Park to levy increasingly strict regulations on commercial fishermen. Eventually, the park was closed to commercial fishing altogether, a decision that would take away the livelihood of many locals.
A lot of them retired. They were getting to retirement. Their kids went into tourist, running airboats, and some of them own airboat companies, and some of them are contractors now, and they're very talented people, and they can adapt, but their love is on the water.
Desperate to make a living, some local residents turned to illegal activities to support their families.
Federal and local lawmen have cracked what they say is a major international drug smuggling ring based right here in southwest Florida.
Early this morning, Rod, a total of 200 agents swarmed into Collier County. It's part of an undercover investigation with the code word Operation Everglades.
The first big arrest that we did was in June of 1983. Basically what we did on that day was we sealed off Everglades City. I believe we seized about 13 commercial fishing vessels. We seized a few airplanes and several automobiles that were involved in the trafficking business on that date.
In the late 1970s, early 1980s, the smuggling of marijuana, or pot hauling, became a big business in the area, leading to the arrests of about 200 people across southwest Florida over a 3-year period.
The largest load that we had came right into Everglades City, and it was 102,000 pounds of baled marijuana, which was about 1,700 bales. But the average load was anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30,000 pounds.
It takes an experienced local boater to navigate the confusing maze of little mangrove keys in the 10,000 islands, making the region an ideal spot for smugglers of any kind. During Prohibition, rum runners from the Bahamas and local moonshiners transported their wares through there. Al Capone even had his own club not far from Everglades, towards Miami. Later, alligator poachers outwitted game wardens in what is known as America's largest roadless wilderness.
But they didn't do it because they loved it. They did it to feed their family. They fished when they had to fish, and they gator hunted when they had to gator hunt. And you're living on the outside, out on the edges, out here. So you supported your family, and you didn't want to live anywhere else. That's where you was born and raised. You want to live here.
This strong desire to remain in the place they loved led some locals, like Toch Brown, to later get involved in the marijuana trade.
Our way of life just simply came to an end, so we had to do something. And like I've always said, the first person that run a load of marijuana through there, we wanted to hang him. But then we began to hurt ourselves so bad and began to find out that marijuana was only something to smoke, probably no more harm in it than tobacco. We just finally all joined in. There wasn't much else to do. It's just the way the cookie crumbled. I'm certainly not proud of it, but if I was back again under the same circumstances, I'd crawl aboard a boatload of it right now.
After the big drug busts of the 1980s, life eventually returned to normal for the residents of Everglades City. Some remained in the stone crabbing industry, while others began focusing more on ecotourism. Everglades City and Chokoloskee Island attract visitors from the world over who come to fish, see alligators, and to experience the area's natural beauty. And every February, thousands come for the Everglades Seafood Festival.
Down in the Everglades.
Over time, Everglades City has evolved From a remote pioneer outpost to Barron Collier's bustling company town, to the outdoor destination it is today. Throughout it all, the community has weathered hurricanes, the move of the county seat and Collier Company to Naples, the decline of the fishing industry, and the drug busts of the 1980s. Chokoloskee Island has changed from an isolated fishing village to a laid-back home for winter residents who began arriving in their RVs after the construction of the causeway. Few places in America evoke the fascination and mystery of the Chokoloskee Bay country, with its stories of hardy pioneers, doers, dreamers, hermits, and outlaws. It is here that history turns into legend.
To purchase a copy of this and other WGCU-produced programs, go to WGCU.org or call 1-888-824-0030. This program was produced for the citizens of Southwest Florida by WGCU Public Media. Show your appreciation for programs like these. Become a member of WGCU, a business supporter, or leave a legacy through a state or planned gift. Visit our website at WGCU.org.